Hello and welcome. These audio recordings are designed for students sitting the CIE IGCSE History exam, and we'll go over some of the more common Paper 4 questions if you're studying the Germany depth study. You might find it useful to have a pen and paper to hand, or it's okay just to listen through as part of your revision. Today we will be looking at the following question. How did the Nazis control the German economy? Before we start, it's important to remember that technique in essay writing is highly skilled on Paper 4. You have 1 hour to answer one question from a choice of 2, from either Weimar and/or Nazism. It's a proper essay, unlike the Part C Paper 1s you might be familiar with, so technique should be a bit more advanced. So, talking of technique, any good Paper 4 will start with a brief introduction following the DCO method. That is to say, define the key terms, give a brief amount of context, and outline your scope. So for this question, in defining the key terms in our introduction, you might wish to discuss and explain what you understand by the concept of the economy, and maybe link it in to the fact that this was crucial in supporting the German war efforts and in making sure that the Nazis gained domestic support. In terms of context, you might want to link back to the period just before Nazis came to power and explain the problems of 1923 and hyperinflation, and then later Wall Street crash, 1929, and the 6 million people unemployed. Finally, we're going to finish the introduction by outlining our scope. Now, normally I would suggest a 5-part scope, but for this argument we're going to just give a very detailed 3-part scope. The areas this essay will investigate include balance of trade problems, unemployment, and farmers. Okay, so let's get going. How did the Nazis control the economy? Point 1. Balance of trade problems. Evidence you may wish to include here includes the following. Germany was importing more than it exported. The Wall Street crash temporarily solved this problem by making Germany too poor for imports. And the Nazis had both long and short-term solutions for this balance of trade issue. In the long term, Hitler's policy of Lebensraum, that is, looking for land or living space in the east, helped address this. He intended to conquer the Ukraine to make Germany self-sufficient in food and raw materials, because the Ukraine was nicknamed the breadbasket. He also hoped to create a common market centered on Germany using small nations from Eastern Europe. His short-term solutions for the balance of trade problems included Schacht's new plan in 1934. Hitler had appointed a minister for the economy who created a plan that made it illegal to pay foreigners in their own money, for example, British firms with British pounds, without government permission. This enabled Schacht to decide what could be bought and from which countries. Germany also began making bilateral agreements with as many countries as possible. These involved trading in ways that did not use up as much of Germany's foreign exchange, e.g. by barter, And this plan was successful in enabling the government to control imports, meaning they could directly import to specific industries, i.e. maintaining both food and rearmament. It failed in that Germany's foreign trade stayed low. Germany could not afford to buy all the things it needed, hence the phrase guns or butter crisis. And so in explaining this point, you may wish to argue that there was an issue with the balance of trade, and that Hitler's and the Nazis' policy towards this in the long term was to look for territory in the east via Lebensraum, and in the short term through Schacht's economic plan, and that in these ways the Nazis controlled the economy. Point 2. Unemployment. Now remember, unemployment stood at 6 million before the Nazis came to power, and so evidence to support this point includes John Maynard Keynes spoke of virtuous circles, the idea of spending more to make more, hence proliferating the economy. The Nazi solution to the unemployment issues can be broken down into work creation, civil service, and fiddling the statistics. Let's start with work creation. The Nazis encouraged work to be done manually rather than by machines, and a famous example of this was on the motorways or autobahns, and this had a knock-on effect on the economy which was positive. In agriculture, the Minister of Agriculture banned the foreclosure, prohibited banks from selling farms where farmers are in debt. They put import taxes or tariffs on many agricultural products, and they made margarine manufacturers put more butter in the margarine, which they had then to buy from the farmers. Farmers earned 17% more money within the first year, and the number of jobs in agriculture began to rise. Moreover, the civil service increased rapidly in size. They spent twice as much money on it, and the effect was many of thousands of more jobs. This kept salaries down, so the extra money then attracted a lot of officials. Hitler also rearmed. His first aim was to make Germany ready for war again. Now we know this was in direct violation of the Treaty of Versailles, and so he had to hide it from the Allies. But arms build-up did provide a few very highly skilled jobs. Our last piece of evidence to support this claim is that the Nazis fiddled the statistics. They got people off the unemployment register and they found loopholes. For example, they removed married women from the list, and they offered loans to women who got married if they promised to give up their job. And so in explaining point 2, the Nazis used work creation, the civil service, rearmament, as well as fiddling with statistics, to change employment levels in Germany and thus help control the economy. Our final point, point 3, is about farmers. Evidence to support this includes German farmers could not sell their food at a price that would enable them to make a good living. German farms were poor. 35% of the German population was involved in agriculture, and the harvest of 1928 had been especially poor. The Wall Street crash meant people bought less, and farmers were borrowing money from banks that led to closure. The socialists in the Weimar Republic didn't take that much care of farmers. But in many ways the Nazis set about helping the farmers, and one of these was through ideology. Helping the farmers was in line with the Volksgemeinschaft ideology, the natural organic community, since intermarriage happened less in rural populations meaning the German peasantry was seen as Aryan. However, this directly contradicted their goal of autarky or self-sufficiency, because farms needed to be modernized instead of using hand labor. There was an issue over farm prices versus workers' breakfasts. The Nazis did not want to pay high wages to industrial workers. And there was another issue over guns versus butter. The Nazis wanted to concentrate on armaments or guns, but Germany could not afford to import materials like copper, rubber and petrol, as well as food. So the workers would have to go hungry, or rearmament would slow down. And so what solutions did they put in place? Well, food production and farmers' incomes increased 20 and 41% respectively. Germany was almost self-sufficient in food. It was less successful in that Germany still did not produce enough food to feed its people, and many peasants lost their enthusiasm for the Nazis, and there were severe shortages of labourers on farms. Richard Darré set up the Reich Food Estate and passed the Entailed Farms Laws in September 1933. The Reich Food Estate controlled every part of agriculture, i.e. the cost of what they used and the price of what they sold. The Entailed Farms Law meant that only the eldest son could inherit a property. The idea was to protect a hereditary peasantry. The Nazi Party introduced ideas such as the word Bau, B-A-U, as an honourable title, and talked about blood and soil. Hermann Göring was put in charge of the Four-Year Plan organisation in 1936, and this involved policies to improve agricultural modernisation to produce in Germany things that would otherwise be imported. Göring introduced government help in farm modernisation, for example, helping farmers buy tractors and lowering prices for fertilisers. And so in explaining this point, and I know there has been substantial evidence here, you may wish to argue that the Nazi policies towards agriculture in terms of ideology, guns versus butter, food production, all helped control the German economy. So, to sum up, we have argued, in answering the question, how did the Nazis control the economy, that they addressed balance of trade problems, unemployment, and farmers. So now it's time for a clever conclusion. Yes, some changes did take place which improved the economy, such as those three listed. But it is important to be aware, as Alan Todd argues, that the economy was improving just before Hitler came to power in January 1933. Also, dangerously, he had built up a war economy based on autarky or self-sufficiency, and the only way for this to continue to function was through its application, i.e. going to war. Okay, thank you very much for listening. I hope you found this useful. If you did, feel free to follow me on Twitter at Mr. Guiney History, or to subscribe to my YouTube channel for further pieces of advice. Bye bye.